Okay. Hello and welcome to our besea.cc podcast. It's called No Time for Silence, and besea.cc stands for British East and Southeast Asian Christian Collective, and is a newly emerging platform where we seek to serve and represent British East and Southeast Asian communities and Christians in the UK. And I'm your host, Wayne Fung, and we recently started under this banner of the BC group what we call a 101 Ethnic Identity Growth Group as a way to pilot group to really explore conversations around racism, identity, but really it's about nurturing courageous conversations and healing and support one another and empower us as we, as East Asian, Southeast Asian Christians, seek to transform the places where that God called us to. And the best place to start is start with ourselves, and that's what we've been doing in this ethnic growth group. And today I'm really happy to have Yinxuan with us. He is one of our members in this growth group to really mutually learn together. Yinxuan, I've known him for a relatively short time, but he's a really good brother and he's a very thoughtful person. He's a research fellow at the London School of Theology. I used to study at LST with my master's, but he is doing his research there on the Bible and the Chinese community in Britain. So, Yinxuan, why don't you tell us more about yourself?
Yes, thank you, Wayne, for having me here. So, like Wayne said, my name is Yinxuan Huang. I'm now a research fellow at the London School of Theology. So I'm leading a research on the impact of Christianity amongst Chinese people in Britain. I'm married, I've got a 4-year-old, and we live in Oxford.
Wow, that is a very exciting topic. I must invite you back another time to re-explore that kind of topic. And you had a background in sociology, isn't it?
Yes, I do. So I did my PhD in sociology of religion. I was interested in that topic partly because I'm a Christian and partly because I am a ethnic minority myself here in Britain, and my PhD research was about ethnic minorities and religion in the British society. So has always been my main research interest, and that's basically what brought me to LST.
Fantastic. So tell us more about your experience as a Chinese, as a East and Southeast Asian Christian, as a Chinese Christian. What's your experience being that?
Right, so I guess that's an interesting combination because I was brought up in China, in mainland China, in Shanghai to be exact. And I was brought up in a very atheist family. My dad, my mom, they never believed until when I was about 19 years old, when out of nowhere, my dad was in Canada at that time. And one day I got a phone call from my mom. She was basically saying, your dad has been being weird in the past few months, and I asked why. And my mom said, well, your dad's been in the church for about 3 months, and he said he wanted to get baptized. So it was the first time that I was amazed by this Christian religion, because I never thought anybody would change my dad's atheist position so easily. And it's interesting because when we were brought up in mainland China, we were obviously brought up in I can't say anti-Christianity, but sort of unfriendly environment to all Christians. And I guess this is why this combination is interesting, because we always think I can't speak for all Chinese, of course, but for me, sometimes I found that Christianity and my Chinese identity are conflicting, because you obviously can't be 100% Chinese if you're Christian, and vice versa, you can't be 100% Christian if you're actually Chinese. So I guess to find out this interaction between being Chinese and being Christian, and how that helped me to redefine my own identity is a very interesting journey. So now I feel like I am both a Chinese and a Christian, because I don't see them as contradictory in nature. So I am happy to call myself a Chinese Christian anytime.
Wow, that's just fascinating. The intersection between being Chinese and being Christian, and you had to navigate that journey. We can explore that later on on this podcast. But that's what you shared about your family coming to know Jesus and your dad being the first person to know Jesus. I mean, even within Chinese circles, or even within any circle, that can be quite rare for the man to come to know Jesus first. I think most of the time is the women. I mean, sociologically, you might can explore that too. But women, most of the time, come to know Jesus first. Even in the Bible, women come to know Christ and follow him. That must be kind of like fascinating. God intervening in the family that your dad came to know Jesus first.
That is a fascinating experience because, my dad has always been an atheist, like I said, and to witness how he transformed in his faith and his value orientations is really amazing, because what you can see, what I saw was basically how Jesus broke him up in terms of his own identity and his own values and perceptions, which has been so strong to us. And he was a very hard-headed person, a very strong personality. But witnessing this process in which Jesus, we always made this joke on him, to witness how Jesus made him from a lion to a sheep, and to see that change is really how I started to question myself. Wow, this faith is unbelievable, because I never, like I said, I never thought, like, I could never imagine how such a strong personality like my dad can be thoroughly transformed like this.
Wow. It is fascinating. Now, for the listeners who may not be Chinese or Asian, you may be surprised to hear that. Are you sure Asians are angry? I mean, never seen that. But as Asians, we know that in the family, though anger can come out. And definitely for me, like being a dad, and men and fathers have a particular angry kind of side to it, isn't it? Yeah, family anger spilling out, and seeing transformation, seeing Jesus, the transformation of Jesus changing our lives and the family, causing us to, like you said, becoming a sheep from a lion. It's a fascinating, amazing thing. Now I've got another question here. It's I think you kind of alluded to it already, but what are some of the challenges that you think being kind of Chinese and being Christian will face then?
Yeah, so like I said, I think for me personally, the biggest challenge has always been to find my own position in this sort of Christianity versus my Chineseness narrative. Because if you were brought up in mainland China, you might be familiar with this narrative that Christianity is basically a proxy of Western culture at its best. And maybe at its worst, it's like a symbol of Western invasion to China, which can be traced back to 200 years ago. So for me, it has been I think the struggle is over, but I have struggled between, how can I be a Chinese, be 100% Chinese and 100% Christian at the same time. So we always think that there is something like a conflict between the two. And what I found in my own spiritual journey is that now I tend not to think the comparison between Chineseness and Christianity as a comparison between Western and Chinese culture. And I mean, if you look at the history of Christianity, and when I look at the history of Christianity, it's really helpful, because when Christianity started in nowadays Israel. It's not actually a Western thing because it's more like a Middle Eastern thing.
Exactly, you're right.
When it went to Rome, the Romans were persecuting Christians. When it went to Britain, it was only until St. Augustine of Canterbury came to Britain in the 6th century that Christianity has become something more popular in this country. And when Christianity went to China, went to Japan, went to Korea, people were also against them. So Christianity is not essentially a Western versus Eastern thing, and it's not anything like that. It's beyond our culture. It's not coming to be part of a culture. It's coming to break the boundaries between cultures. And I mean, if you look at the Bible, like what Apostle Paul said, basically you don't have to be a Jewish in culture first, and then you become a Christian. You become a Christian because you follow Jesus. It's that simple. It's not defined by your culture. It's not defined by your family tree. It's just defined by your relationship with Jesus. And I found the most beautiful side of the Christian faith is that it helps us to break these boundaries, which may look so bright, so strong, so unbreakable. But our faith transcends beyond these. It brings together people of different skin colors, of different culture background, different ethnicity. And it's just because of Jesus we are in one. No matter you're Chinese, you're British, you're Indian, you're American. It's just because of Jesus we can be called Christian, and we call each other brothers and sisters in this church of family.
That's right. Well, thank you for that. I mean, how do we reconcile our cultural heritage with the Christian worldview? Again, when we say Christian worldview, we'll be very careful, because is it a Western worldview, or how do we understand it really Christian understanding? Because we'll always impose, to a certain extent, our own culture into the reading of the Bible and how we understand it. But like you said, and most people don't recognize it, it's Christianity is not a Western religion. Is an Middle Eastern religion, and the longer history, and a history of, I think, the actual Eastern part of it, longer than the Western part of it, and the heritage of it is very rich, and we need to kind of understand, and how do we then embrace our Eastern culture in Christianity is very important. Just reminded me of a book I read recently. It's called A Multitude of All Peoples, Engaging Ancient Christianity's Global Identity by Vince Bantu. And he talks a lot about the historical background of Christianity that most people kind of miss. I'm going to put it on the link so people can understand it, but really Yinxuan has really bring that up as really important. My follow-on question is,
yes,
with that then, how can a church, obviously, I mean, a church we're in, but really a group like this, the BC group, can help to meet these challenges? Because I found, interestingly, when I've been in a Chinese church for many years, only nearly 25 years, I never remember one single time that we talked about our Chinese kind of culture in relation to Christianity. It was just given that you're Chinese, you kind of like given that you have Chinese culture, but I never talked about it. So my question is, how can a group like this, the BC Christian Collective, play any role in facilitating conversations like this, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really blessed to be part of this group, because the reason I become a part of this group is basically the answer to your question. I never had a chance to share my thoughts with, I can't say never, but I rarely had a chance to share what I'm sharing with you, with all my fellow Christians, neither in a British church nor in a Chinese church. So I guess we definitely need a platform to be more proactive, to be more outspoken about these issues. And, like the name of the podcast, we can't be that silent. We need to make some noises, and not, I mean, in a sense that we start any sort of like debates or create issues or anything like that. But it's just we need a healthy loving and transparent platform where we can share our thoughts regarding ethnicity, being a Christian, and the struggles that we might have in this dialogue, in either a church setting or actually in a private setting, like what we have in these online conversations. I think it's really important that people start to think about this, because it's really important. Like Chinese Christianity, we always use that word, but really we never ask this question. So by saying we are Chinese Christian, are we first Chinese or are we first Christians? So which identity comes first? I think this is really important, because if you look at some, I can't say all, but if you look at some Chinese churches, obviously some are more, I would say, inward in nature than the others. And some might be more reserved, like there are more Chinese, ethnic Chinese in that church. And it's not really, like what we say, integrated to the wider community. But is that needed? Do we need to be more like Christian, or do we want to articulate more of our Chinese identity? I mean, there are no right or wrong answers to these questions, but at least, these are important questions, and we should probably have a platform to share about what we think, because we are in a multicultural society, and we are facing an unprecedented period of time where we have many more immigrants from Hong Kong, for example. So the issue of being Chinese and being part of this Christian family and being part of the British society, it is something really important.
It is.
For not only for us who are already in the UK, and also for those who are coming to the UK.
Yeah. Hey, this is a question I've just thought about. I mean, you mentioned earlier that there is no kind of contradiction between like Chinese and being Christian. But obviously, we know, like you just mentioned, there are things that we may need to think about as well in terms of being a Christian and Chinese and interaction with society at large. What do you think are some of the socio-cultural blind spots that us as East Asians might have that we need to be aware of, especially as Christians? Because in any culture, especially when we kind of face a different culture, we would kind of have blind spots that we're not aware of, and sometimes people will point it out to us, go, what, we have blind spots? But obviously in Western society, these things will become quite kind of magnified a lot more. Yeah. What do you think are some blind spots that we need to be aware of?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is, again, the word silent. Because, so I just tell a quick story. So last week, I had a friend coming to me. He knows I'm Christian, and he came to me in a very happy sort of mood, and he was telling me basically, you know what, Yinxuan, I'll tell you something very amazing. So I found, actually, there is a Chinese church in the UK. I'm like, oh, okay. Actually, I do know there's one Chinese church in the UK. There are actually a Chinese church in the UK. There are over 160 to be exact. And he goes, oh, actually, I never knew these, because I never knew there were Christians, Chinese Christians, besides me. So I guess, again, it brought us back to the word silent, because I think one blind spot is probably derived from these cultural differences between the Chinese community and the probably the wider British community, because we used to be, we are considered as the sort of quiet model minority population. Chinese tend to be successful. We tend to, if you look at the economics statistics, Chinese are always on the top of the money-making list. But on the other hand, the Chinese and the Chinese church, we tend to be silent. And by silent, I mean we're not actively engaged with many societal issues. For example, racism. And we all know, and guess we might come to that topic later, because Chinese has been the main victims of racial attacks, harassment since the COVID-19 pandemic began. And, we have to say that we're unhappy. We have to let others know this is wrong, and we want to stop it, period. And I mean, culturally speaking, Chinese might be a bit slow in making these things happen. But if you look at, comparatively, if we look at Black Lives Matter and how the other minority groups try to push things forward, this might be something that Chinese community have to learn, because on the one hand, we are suffering. Just take racism, for example. This is a real issue. We want to share about it. But on the other hand, I mean, if we are quiet, as we have been, then it's very hard to make a connection between us and the wider community. And I think how to make the Chinese community more visible, especially the Christian community visible, is something that might fall into the blind spot you mentioned.
Wow, there's so much to explore, and you're definitely right that we can be quiet. I mean, there are pockets of voices, individuals, and maybe also certain generations within the East Asian Chinese kind of Christian community, but largely it could be people from certain background or younger ones that will make them more voice. And I think another layer of the work is how do we as Asians have that really intergenerational kind of communication, so that it's not just a few saying something, but the whole community can grow together, because especially the Asian community is such a family orientated community that we can't just have simply individuals moving, but the whole community is not engaged, isn't it? To have real change, we need to have that, which leads on to another question. Being Asian, being East Asian, we with other East Asians as well, whether it's like Malaysian, Japanese, Korean, who all share a similar worldview heritage, like Confucius culture heritage. Yeah. And a lot of time in this culture, harmony is very important. Yeah, so hospitality, harmony, relationship, like you said, being kind of like quiet in the sense that you don't want to rock the boat is quite key to our culture. But in fact, actually within our Asian groups, even in group between ourselves, we have a lot of tension and conflicts. Yeah, which is kind of paradox to what we kind of portray to desire to have. And I remember in our last session, our growth group, I mentioned that as a Hong Kong person, I grew up in Hong Kong, and I grew up with this intense sense of prejudice towards mainland Chinese, either consciously or unconsciously, in the media that we have and what we read in television and the media, things we watch, always portray mainlanders as kind of backward and have issues, and people make fun of them. And obviously for me, it's now realizing that that's actually, it kind of like we have internalized kind of racist towards one another. And I just want to say, like, for me, it's recognizing that kind of pain and sin is really deep. Yeah. But I just want to know more about the impact on you, so like someone like yourself being a mainland Chinese, and how has that impacted you when you know that sometimes people have hostility towards or misunderstanding towards mainland Chinese?
Well, I guess it's a mixed feeling, because what you said is really true. And I'm really thankful that you are sharing this very openly, very honestly. I'm really thankful for that, because it's not easy when, interestingly, when, you read news and you hear, somebody was accused of being a racist, the very first sentence you will probably hear from them is that, I'm not a racist. But, the funny thing is that, we can be victims of racism. And spontaneously we can also be offenders. And when it comes to mainland Chinese, we have a quite an easy relationship with Hong Kongers and Taiwanese, I guess. That is true. And I mean, there are lots of historical issues with that, especially in the past few years, as we all know, the political issues in East Asia has somehow helped escalate these tensions. And I mean, I feel that, well, the main source of hate that I can feel as a mainland Chinese and is mainly from the internet. So when you look at these, for example, comment sessions of YouTube or other social media platforms, it's very bad. And I felt bad as a mainland Chinese because the words are real, the bad words are real, and each time you saw these, you got hit. That's inevitable. But I say it's mixed feeling because when I really sit down with my Hong Kong and Taiwanese brothers and sisters, I never had any issues with them, and they're really loving and caring. And we all sort of know, politics is probably a topic we should avoid. And everyone knows that it's like a game rule you follow, because this is something really sensitive. And in my own research, I've heard stories, especially in 2019. There were even stories that in the Chinese church, the Mandarin-speaking congregation and Cantonese-speaking congregation refused to pray for each other. And this is really bad. I think somehow these racism or hate, whatever you call them, is really derived from hate. So we tend to hate each other, and because we hate, we try to create bad things so we can attack each other. And I mean, for me, the terrible part is that you have to face that hate, which is real. The good part is that there is a cure, and love is the cure. Love kills hate. And I mean, that's why while this hatred is real, I guess sometimes amongst us, I mean, my church family really gave me something different, because we know this is not something, this is something conquerable. We can kill this hate by really loving each other. And I mean, it's really hard sometimes when you are hit by hate, if you're driven by hate, you always say something bad. You always try to hurt the others. But I guess the only thing I can say is that's why learn to love is really important. And again, I think I'm blessed, really blessed as a Christian, because in my Christian family, I know where the source of love is from, and I know it's there.
Yeah, it's such a tough thing, isn't it? Because we want to love our neighbors, but Jesus moved even further, so love your enemies. Yeah, but the thing is, as we love our enemies, there is still an acknowledgement of the difference and the thing that might be hostile, and the issue within that. So we can't simply say we love those we disagree, but we don't acknowledge the differences and the thing we don't agree on. I think the challenge will be is how do we bridge that gap of hostility with people beyond our own ethnic group or even within our ethnic kind of heritage, and bring real reconciliation, the power of the gospel, but also acknowledging and having those uncomfortable conversations and face those truths and face them. I think, those are real deep work that we need to do. And I really hope that in our own communities, because think about it, what chances do we have when we talk about racism beyond the church walls of the church and beyond our ethnic group or people against us, when we can't even deal with our own conflict within ourselves. Can't be genuine, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it actually reminded me about why we had this besea.cc group, because one reason that people are sort of driven by hate is that we don't have communication. And communication is important because that is the mechanism that we can sit down, be calm, learn to listen to each other, and to listen to the arguments from the other side. And it's only by these healthy contact that we can get problems solved. That's why you see more of these hate speech on the internet rather than in an in-person group meeting. And because they don't have healthy contact. And that's why, the more we have these conflicts, the more we need these healthy platforms and mechanisms that help us to eliminate these, you can call them misunderstanding or conflicts, but we need such a platform, well, like besea.cc, to really talk each other through and try to create a good conversation. And it doesn't have to be, harmonized. There are conflicts, obviously.
Exactly. Yeah.
Talks, communication, and especially healthy communication by reasoning, by listening, is, I guess, the only way out.
You're absolutely right. You're definitely right. When I was preparing for today, I was reading this verse, and I'll think about our people and different people, especially as Christians. And it's in 1 Peter. It says, to God's elect, exiles scattered throughout the provinces of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, who have been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father, through the sanctifying work of the Spirit, to be obedient to Jesus Christ and sprinkled with his blood. Grace and peace be yours in abundance. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Now that is amazing, because sometimes we forget that even when we have disagreement, especially as Christians, we are actually in the same family. We're all exiles and strangers in a strange land, and somehow we want to be kind of different kind of strangers. They're different from you, but we are all share in the same living hope. That we need to remember that. But we can't, like you said, we can't gloss over the things that are difficult, but then bring it out and have these truthful conversations to bring real change.
Can I share a story with you?
Yes.
So that verse really reminded me of that story. So we just talked about how victims of racism can become a racist him or herself. So I remember this was in 2018, and I was traveling to New Orleans in Louisiana for a conference, and before I went there, I did my research. So I knew it was a quite problematic city, very high homicide rate, and there's a very big Black population there. And that's when my sort of racist, the racist in me became more powerful. So I was thinking, it's probably, stereotyping, Black people, higher homicide rate. That makes sense. So I went there. Well, unluckily, unfortunately, the flight was delayed. So when I arrived at the airport, it was already close to midnight. It was around 10-ish. So 10 p.m. So I was basically waiting for my hotel shuttle in the airport. But it was pretty, that part of the airport is pretty remote. So it was just me waiting for the hotel shuttle, and that shuttle actually never came. So I was a bit frightened because I didn't know what to do. I was a bit scared, so I was trying to find a public phone. While I was walking, I saw this big black guy walking towards me, and because it's all outside, it's a bit dark, I was really, frightened. I thought, wow, it reminded me about the high homicide rate plus a big black population. So my intuition told me that this must be a bad guy. He's big, he's black, he's gonna do something bad to me. And I was like stunned. I was just standing there. And then that gentleman came. He turned out to be an airport worker. He is big, he is black. But what he did later was that he used his own phone to try to call the hotel for me. And turned out that the hotel refused to send a shuttle because it was late. And it was just me. They didn't want to just send a shuttle to collect one person. But that gentleman, he argued for me, the stranger he met for the first time. And he managed to persuade the hotel to send a shuttle to collect me. And after that, when we say goodbye, he would basically, goodbye, brother, God bless you. So I was like, this was such a slap on my face. And God taught me a very important lesson that day. Never judge people by his skin color, by how he looks like. And that brother really taught me how to be a gentleman, how to be a good person. And that was actually the first time I felt, wow, Yinxuan, you're racist. You're very, very racist. So I'll never forget that night, never forget that experience. And that somehow, I think, told exactly, that echoed the verse you just said, because God didn't bring us up or glorify us because of our color or success or social status, whatever. It's just in faith that we are connected, and we should be judged that way.
Well, thank you for your powerful story, powerful yet authentic, and for your openness to share about something so, broken about yourself, isn't it? That you recognize that you were racist, but the thing, sometimes we don't talk about these things. It's almost like it's given, and we hide them in our brain, our hearts. But then it leaks out in our behavior, and even within Christian circles, how we deal with one another. Yeah, and it's so important that we really bring that out and allow God to transform us. But thank you for speaking up about it. We're coming to the end of our time, but a quick last question to ask you. Earlier you said that as East Asian, as Chinese, we can be very quiet and hidden. What encouragement would you give to our listeners and other East and Southeast Asians out there?
I mean, two things, really. So the first thing is when your peers come to you and say something about, either Chineseness or racism or anything related to being Chinese and being Chinese Christian in this country, do not refuse to have that conversation. Try to engage with that. I think it's really important that we challenge ourselves to get engaged in this conversation, because we are in this community, and we're not only in this Chinese community, we're also in this broader British community where we all are part of. So it's only that we accept others' sharings, we accept other stories, we listen, that we can create a bigger, a more lively conversation. And also I think when we want to share something, we can have the encouragement, we can have the courage to share these. And Again, that brings us back to this conversation. We need a platform to have these conversations, and so I mean, especially for church leaders, for community leaders, I mean, we really should build a platform like besea.cc. So somehow we are really a role model. So we can encourage other people to share and to share our voice. So when you think something's wrong, say it. When you think something's correct, we should do it, say it. And, we are in a day and age where, we want to be connected, not just within our own family, but we want to be connected with the wider world, wider community. So I always say the wider, because that's really what I think. We don't have to restrict ourselves into this Chinese narrative. And we are part of the UK. And I feel that we are obliged to contribute to it, to make it better. And we can't make the society better. We can't make the Chinese community better if we say nothing. So it's only when we said it, other people can hear it, and then we can have a conversation.
Well, thank you so much for your time and insight. I've really been blessed by it, and I hope other listeners also have been blessed by it as well. And I will definitely invite you back for some topics that you are passionate about. But to our listeners out there, thank you so much for listening to our BC podcast, No Time for Silence. And join us on our next episode where we'll talk about values and etiquette that we as East and Southeast Asians have, our values and etiquette. Our next session will be led by Erica, Asian American Korean lady who will be facilitating our session. So I'll find some time to invite her to come and also share about her experience as well. But thanks for listening, and thank you, Yinxuan.
Thank you for having me, Wayne.
Thank you.
My pleasure.